and to do so, I would like to introduce Dr. Ned Murray. Dr. Ned Murray is an Associate Director of the Florida International University Metropolitan Center. He has more than 20 years of professional and academic experience in city planning and economic development. He has a PhD in urban and regional planning with concentration in economic development from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Between the housing studies include the Broward County Housing Linkage Fee Nexus Study, the Palm Beach County Rental Housing Study, Broward County Affordable Housing Needs Assessment, and recently completed the City of Fort Lauderdale Affordable Housing and Economic Analysis. Please let's welcome Dr. Ned Murray.
Thank you, Liz. Do I need a mic? Yeah, that's what I thought. I kind of felt like this was a classroom setting, so I talk normally really loud. So if it's okay, otherwise I'll use the mic. Good? Looking at the back row. Okay, thanks, guys. Thank you, Neil, sir, for having me, and thank you for the. I think I've spoken before the Planning Congress several times. I don't think I was here last year, but I think a couple of years before that. When Bill Dennis was here, he used to always drag me up here from Miami. And it is a real pleasure, and I'm glad that Nielsen mentioned my background actually in city planning, because I'm coming to you today more so as a professional planner. I know what you're dealing with. Like, how many professional planners are planning and planning? Most of you are. How many elected officials here? Congratulations. Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions as I go along, because it is really important. When I started out as a professional planner up in Massachusetts, and I was considered sort of a maverick on the Massachusetts Association of Planning Directors organization. We were always trying to come up with ideas to challenge us, because we will always seem to be left behind. When there were budget cuts, we were always considered ancillary to a lot of the other departments, and of course the unionized departments within our city. It was always a challenge for us to kind of stand up and take advantage of opportunities. So we've always been challenged. So I saw that title, Planning Challenges. We're always being challenged. But I also like to look at it more in terms of opportunities, because it's the opportunities that this man-built environment and this natural environment provide us is really where we can step up. Interestingly, given the title, the subtitle of the conference on job density and housing, I recall, trying to deal with these issues in a much more holistic, integrated way at several junctures of my professional planning career. But we all know we get kind of caught up in whatever we have to do as planners. And of course, here in the state of Florida, we've been under the gun for some years now because of the growth management statute and all that has required of us relative to this kind of big government type of exercise, bureaucratic exercise that we've had to go through, which is kind of in many ways, and I know I've said this in the past, and I kind of give you the specific, it's kind of stymied our innovation in many ways, because we had to do this. This is our job, right? Dealing with the statute and years and all the updates, the amendments. I mean, you all know what I'm talking about. So there's a real opportunity now, probably more so than my 18 years since I've been here, and I was visiting professor some years ago at FAU. I remember teaching a site planning course, and we visited the City Place site before it had broken ground. The clearance had taken place, and we were standing with my class, and we began talking about if we had a chance to do this over again, if we could have gone back into the planning of City Place, what would be some of the issues that we would need to address, given now what we know, now that the project was going forward. In the class, and maybe you were in my class at the time, we talked about number one was connectivity. How does this project relate to West Palm Beach as a whole, downtown, Clematis Street, its surrounding neighborhood? What opportunities was this going to create relative to jobs, quality jobs, better what opportunities would come out of that? So there was a number of issues that we talked about then, and of course now we've seen it play out, and I just drove through it. It certainly looks nice. I don't know enough about it, but I'm sure these are questions that come up a lot. And the reason I bring this up, and I want to preface, I have a fairly short PowerPoint. It's more based on messages than any quantity of slides. In fact, I've been getting away from PowerPoint even in my classroom, but I'm sure you guys are all bored with these things anyway, as is my picture up there. But I want to kind of just give you a couple of remarks to kind of preface what I'm going to be talking about and the message that I want to get across today. I was asked to speak next week at a plenary event, which some of you may be familiar with. It's called Habitat 3. Probably will be in Miami doing this. Miami's one of 4 cities in the country to do this plenary session on this global conference that we held at Quito, Ecuador, later in the year. And the issue now that I think many of you know, most of you know, should know, is the whole issue of resilience. And what do we mean by resilience? I think we all kind of know what planning resilience means, but what do we mean by resilient communities? And what do we mean by this term that's being thrown around a lot more now, economic resilience? And what it really comes down to in Florida is really ground zero for this, is how do we address the exogenous types of threats that we face relative to economic cycles. I mean, who was worse hit than by the recession and the housing bubble in South Florida? And of course, the environment and environmental types of crises like hurricanes that we deal with. So who's better dealing with this than South Florida? And I think that's one of the reasons why this event is being held in Miami next week, and for this global event later on in the year. And when we talked about it the other day, one of the first things they asked me about was, we'd like you, Ned Murray, to address what's happened in Miami, particularly as a result of Midtown and its impact on surrounding neighborhoods of Wynwood, Little Haiti, Alapata, and where have we gone? And how does some of the issues that we deal with when we get east of I-95 in particular, but even along the I-95 corridor, because I think as you all know, there's not a whole lot of difference if you go 1 mile east or west of I-95 from Palm Beach all the way to Miami. It all kind of looks the same. That's where 75% of your industrial land remains. That's where a lot of the older neighborhoods, established African-American neighborhood, Dixie Highway, that's where your rail is. There's a lot of common threads from Palm Beach all the way down to Miami. So we began talking about that, and they wanted me to address that. And I'm thinking about this presentation this morning as well, in terms of, well, what does this all mean? What does it all mean not only in terms of the challenges, but what does it mean in terms of the opportunities that we have? Because we're going to be talking about resilient communities and resilient economies. What is it? Where do we come in on? Where do we as planners come in on? How many of you, raise your hand, do land use and transportation plan? Some combination thereof. At least half of you. How many of you do economic development plan? More so than I would have thought. Economic development planning is one area of planning where we've been left out for the most part as planners over the years. And I'm going to get to this a little bit more in a minute. What about urban design? How many of you actually get involved in urban design? As planners. How many planners are doing the urban design work? Okay, so that takes me to, I think, what I think is most important here in the message that I'm going to get into as well. Back when we were doing the plan for Midtown Miami, which was part of a larger FEC corridor study that the city of Miami was doing at the time, we were brought in as the planners, and I was the only planner at the table. So this huge project that includes the whole FEC corridor of the city of Miami. And Midtown Miami was an afterthought at the time. Midtown Miami was 56 acres that was owned by the railroad, Flagler Railroad, at least to the Port of Miami, for a staging facility for containers coming off the ships from the port. So we were told from day one that we had a big hole in the donut because we had 56 acres sitting there looking like hell with all these ship containers on this land, broken down, fences around it, and everyone in the neighborhoods, whether it be Wynwood, Katy, Edgewater, would say, what are you going to do about that? Anything you do with that 56 acres there sitting like that, it's just going to be a failure. So we took that as an opportunity to say, you know what, let's deal with it. Let's deal with it. And I remember at the time, and this is where the opportunities, that issue came up again. As I was sitting at this table, and I'm the only planner there, I remember sitting, and of course one of my favorite architects, Bernard Siskovich, who worked on the plan with us, I looked at him and I said, Bernard, we need another plan. We need at least one more plan. Because we're doing so much out in the community, working with neighborhood groups, working with the city officials, working with the business community. I need planners. And at least one more plan. I remember Bernard looked at me and said, why, we're planners. Siskovich are urban planners. And I remember saying, Bernard, no, you're not. That's like me telling you I'm an architect. So I'll tell you one thing we can agree upon. We're probably both urban designers. And it's that urban design perspective that we need to kind of gel together to make this all happen. Now, of course, that's all history now, but obviously the project went forward, the plan was adopted in Midtown Miami, which was just like I said, an afterthought because we didn't know what to do with this proverbial hole in the donut. Happened within 9 months. 9 months after the plan was adopted by the city. So it can happen, but planners need to be involved in that process, whether it be through economic development, whether it be through urban design, or whether it be through all the other skills that we bring to the table, negotiation skills we have in terms of community facilitation, our ability to work with elected officials, probably more so than a lot of other disciplines. So I'm going to come back to this because it's really, really critical when we begin to think of the challenges that this conference puts forward relative to job density and housing, but also in terms of the opportunities. That's really what I want to focus on as I go forward. Okay. In thinking about this, I really wanted to go back to some basics, because most of my professional career has been as a city planning director up in Massachusetts, but even as I come down here and practice planning, so much of my focus has really been on the economy, because the economy is the foundation to everything. And I think we learned about that back in 2007, 2008. Yeah, the bubble burst, but then the recession hit and we got hit the hardest. And remember, we before that, by the way, we just completed a prosperity study from Miami-Dade County, which some of you may have heard about, getting a lot of print media and also done the LRN. And it comes back to some of these same fundamental issues, which, by the way, the HUD Habitat-Free Conference will be dealing with next week as well. It's the economy. Start with the economy, because the economy, if you think about it in terms of prosperity, which, by the way, is one of the indicators of economic resiliency, is fundamental. And if we don't have an economy that has certain pillars attached to it relative to opportunity, mobility, another resiliency indicator, equity, another resiliency indicator, and stability. Stability to be able to withstand some of the economic cycles that we go through. One of the things that we found in the study that we did for Miami-Dade, which applies the economy, is to say we're one labor market. Miami, Broward, Palm Beach, we're all one labor market. Okay? What we found is that the bubble in 2007 and the subsequent recession in 2008 wasn't just a housing bubble. It was an economic bubble because so much of our economy was reliant on real estate development. So once real estate development crashed, there goes all your jobs. Construction jobs, jobs in finance, insurance, real estate. We begin to look at what really happened post-2007. We really begin to see that why Miami and South Florida were the hardest hit was because, guess what? Our whole economy wasn't just housing, our whole economy was based upon this big bubble. Okay? So we need to go back to the basics, and one of the first and most fundamental planning axioms that I learned coming out of the PhD program that I was in Amherst, I did learn something when I went back to school, was this one. My professor up there, John Mullen at UMass Amherst, he always said this: keep it simple. People follow jobs. People follow jobs. So think about that. It's all about, once again, the economy and people looking for work. Whether it be people moving here from another place, new immigrants coming into South Florida, or our children, hopefully finding a place here to be able to afford to live. So, keep it simple. But that connects us. If that's fundamental, that should be fundamental to our charge as urban planners, right? Understanding that people follow jobs. What does that mean? What are the ramifications of that? Well, they're enormous, and we can talk about that some more. When people follow jobs, the first thing they do, how many of you watch that show, House Hunters? House Hunters or House Hunters? What's the first thing they're always looking for? They want to be close to their job, they want to be able to afford to be there. And they don't want to drive. And most of them are young professionals. And this is not only in the United States, but global, right? So this is the calculation that millennials make today, more so than my generation, but more and more, I think we're becoming more sensitive to it. It's this calculation of housing, distance, and transportation costs will ultimately determine where we're looking for. It's as simple as that, once again. You know, so we have to figure out, once again, where are jobs being created, what kind of jobs are being created, the quality of those jobs, and how are we going to get to that job? We want to be close by. We certainly don't want to be laying all these transportation costs on top of that. Housing. How many affordable housing studies that the Metropolitan Center has done since 2006? I can't even count them. And most of them sit there. I don't even know how much gets implemented anymore. Angela, how many have we done in Broward? I don't even know anymore. 10? I don't know who would be here. We just finished one in Monroe. And I'll tell you, we think things are bad here. Monroe County is just losing any level of sustainability relative to housing. So, what I want to emphasize here, getting back to this theme, it's not just a question of affordability. In fact, I try not to use that word anymore because it's just like falling on deaf ears. What the hell is that? Okay, not only that, but it has a lot of bad connotations as well. Some people think about affordable housing, nice housing, oh my gosh, who's that going to bring into our community kind of thing. But let's start thinking about it in terms of the most important elements, in terms of, once again, people following jobs, determining and calculating where they live based upon where they work, location, type. And by type, what I mean is, whether it be an apartment, whether it be in a flat, whether it be in a mixed-use development, hopefully, you know, some kind of district. Is it for owner? Is it for rent? Does it have 2 bedrooms? One of the problems we have here in South Florida is that all this stuff being built, 1 bedroom. How do two millennials share an apartment if you only got 1 bedroom? That's why people are able to do this in New York, in Boston, and Washington, because you can find places I mean, they're small, but you need 2 bedrooms. You have 1 bedroom together. So that's a big issue there. And of course the price point. I'm not going to use that term affordability. But the price point. So you're very conscious of that all the time. You're going to look for your job, you're going to find a house or an apartment, hopefully very close to that job. And you're not thinking so much it's affordable. No, you're thinking about it from, okay, that rent is $800 or $1,000, or that mortgage, potential mortgage is $100. I know what I can afford. I'm very looking at numbers. Okay? And then, this is a really interesting one. The one I think, and I'm going to get into it in a minute, a little bit more, is we've been following industry sectors very closely at the Metropolitan Center, and not only just the cluster types of industries, the target industries, but a whole sector that, how many of you are familiar with advanced industries? The advanced industry sector that the Brookings Institute has identified. These are the top 50 in terms of post-recession, the ones that are creating the most jobs, the better paying jobs, most of the research and development occurring, the most national product is coming out of. These are the key industries. They cut across sectors. So in some ways, it's a lot better way of looking at economic development and industrial development when you begin to think cross-sector instead of just focusing on certain sectors, because that gets really, really difficult. And I think we've all learned that with economic development. Okay, connecting the dots. Okay, this is my heading. Thank you, Neil, for giving me this opportunity to do that. So here are the big four, and you know, it's so interesting. Here's my teaching class for the past year. I used this very term. So when this opportunity came up, I said, thank you. These are the four: the economy, housing, transportation, and land use. But I've been telling everyone in my class, and when I do get in front of an audience over the last year or so, that never bring up one without the other three. Never just get focused on housing, never just get focused on land use or the economy without talking about the other three. This is that holistic, integrated perspective that we as planners have an opportunity to bring to the table. Because we think like that, we think process, we think not only form, but we think function. And that form versus function debate, we're always dealing with it, but I think we as planners probably understand that better than anyone. Because that's part of our planning history. That's the white city, that's the city beautiful debate that came out of that. Okay, the beautiful city, how does it function, right? So, the economy. Who's here and who's growing? So we need to know that. We need to understand, we need to get the data. We need good data, we need to understand. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I don't know if we'll have enough time today. Housing, as I said, type and location, that's the most critical element. Okay? And when we get into the affordability aspect of it, that's where density comes in. And that's where density is going to help. Okay? Transportation, efficient transportation corridor. Once again, a very resiliency type of perspective. Efficient transportation corridors, commercial corridors, that's going to be a real focus going forward. Probably a lot of you dealing with that right now. And what does that mean? Well, TOD, we cannot be talking TOD unless we're talking equitable TOD. Who's going to live there? We know now, especially in Miami, what I'm a little more familiar with right now, a lot of the land in the neighborhood of the private coastal land is already being bought up. And then the question becomes, who's this TOD? Where's this development? Who's this development going to benefit? In the end, we're going to have more luxury high-rise along a rail. We're going to have residents with mixed use, mixed income development that will accommodate the workforce that we need to address both with the economy. That's a big, big discussion. By the way, Miami has legislation right now, the land bank, all county land within 2 miles of the city. So that's land use, and this is where it all comes together. So we should not be thinking land use, once again, unless we're thinking the economy, housing, and transportation. We'll talk a little bit about this later. We now have an opportunity with our comp plan that we've done in 2011 to really be innovative, much more strategic than we ever were in the past. If you don't have an economic element to your comp plan, you gotta definitely do it, but do it in a way that connects all these dots. Okay, so how do we deal with, the 4-letter word in here, the density issue? I call it a 4-letter word because sometimes when you bring it up, as you know, it's treated like a 4-letter word. I guess I've been doing this long enough now, particularly here in South Florida, in Miami or in other locations throughout Florida, that when you begin to think about bringing these dots, connecting these dots, this form function debate and how does density apply to that, you begin to realize that it shouldn't be just a natural order of things. Because once you get folks to agree on what it is you're trying to do, and I'm using Midtown right now as an example, once you really get everyone on board, the elected officials, community leaders, surrounding neighborhoods, those who are going to be impacted, stakeholders, once you get everyone in agreement on what is it you're trying to accomplish relative to not just creating mixed use in some generic term or a generic way, but also be thinking about it in terms of creating real districts that do integrate with surrounding neighborhoods and other transportation corridors and really do provide a real function. So it's not just building something to form, but you're building something that really addresses the function that we're talking about. Once you do that, all of a sudden the density thing is not even, is less of an issue. Because now you all kind of agree on what it is that you're trying to accomplish and what that's going to look like. In terms of scale, okay? In terms of mixed use, and most important in terms of function. So if you look at this, this is how big plans all get started. That upper left picture, that little sketch, I asked one of our architects, who was working with the Scovers at the time. I was driving by that the causeway on here. In the foreground is the design. You're all familiar with the Midtown, I'm sure. But the foreground on that upper sketch is the design district. You obviously see downtown Miami skyline to the distance. You can actually see the beach over there across Biscayne Bay. What I asked, because as I was making that drive back and forth on, I guess that 395, I always get 395 or 195. I was looking down at that 56 acres of containers and saying, you know what? Can you get up on the highest building in the design district and sketch this out as a